Right. Well, it is now 2 o'clock Eastern, just hitting 11 a.m. for folks joining us on the West Coast. My name is Tom Galucci from the Mortgage Collaborative, and welcoming you into the latest edition and a special edition of TMC Tech Talk today, featuring our newest preferred partner and industry leader in the digital closing space. That would be Snapdocs. And with me for today's discussion is Vice President of Business Development, Todd Maki. And real quick, before I introduce Todd and we kind of start into today's discussion, I just want to welcome everybody into Tech Talk. And this is where, joined by a special guest on a recurring basis in mortgage tech, could chat about current events, new innovations, consumer experience, and different exciting announcements that our partners that join us in the hot seat here are seeing on their end. For our attendees, lines have been muted today. That's just to avoid any background noise in your area. So any comments, suggestions that you have, questions you may have for Todd, you can feel free to drop those in the chat. Also welcome any commentary on future discussion topics or industry leaders that you'd like to see as a Tech Talk guest. You can drop that information in the chat, or you can reach out to me directly or anybody on the TMC team. And then for our attendees, members out there maybe seeking more information on Snapdocs, you can contact Todd directly, and actually we'll have his information dropped in the chat here for you. But on that note, I want to welcome in Vice President of Business Development with Snapdocs, Todd Maki. Todd, how you doing today?
Good to be here. Thank you. Appreciate you putting me in the hot seat.
Yeah, I'll keep it pretty light for you. Not too challenging here. Well, with Tech Talk, I always love to start these discussions off with, featuring my guest and their company, kind of talking a little bit about their background, and really starting off with our discussion. We'd love for you to kind of share with our audience, the background of Snapdocs, and in particular, your founder and CEO, Aaron King, just because I think he's got a really compelling backstory with his personal experience within the closing process, particularly as a notary. I want to say he started at the age of 18 and kind of led him down a path towards the formation of Snapdocs. So I'd love if you could elaborate for us.
Yeah, that's right. He became a notary right out of high school at age 18, began working on mortgage closings pretty much immediately thereafter, and did that for a little while before he began working in settlement. He worked in closings within a lender, built a business that sort of aggregated notaries and began to accelerate some of the processes that he was coordinating. And then that led him to creating Snapdocs in 2013, with the first product being to automate the process of managing mobile notaries for settlement companies as they facilitate the mortgage closing. Effectively, the product was, the best way to think about it is like Uber for notaries. That product quickly grew through the early teens to the point where it is now, where we conduct hundreds of thousands of closings and touch something like 20% of all mortgage closings in the industry. And on that sort of Uber for notaries notary scheduling automation product, I think we're 5 to 10x the size of the next closest player in the space. So just had a sort of huge, clearly the right idea based on his experience, living in the closing, the depths of the closing for now over 20 years. And then that led to 2017 or so, we began our digital closings product, which we expanded and provide automated digital closings for mortgage lenders, which of course we'll spend some time talking about today.
Oh, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing. And it really is a compelling story, considering the organization's been in existence for less than a decade. And I think if my numbers are right, that Snapdocs is responsible, I believe, for, was it like 3 million overall closings in the past year?
Yeah, that's about the number. Yeah, right about 2.5 to 3 million closings in the last 12 months.
Yeah, extremely impressive. And now I'm going to put you on the hot seat because that's such an interesting story and a hard act to follow. But I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about your personal background, Todd, and kind of what led you to Snapdocs.
Yeah, sure. So don't have the same notary experience as Aaron, that's for sure. I mean, he's certainly the right guy to found and lead a company like Snapdocs. But I've had a bit of a circuitous background. I spent a decade in clean energy, then moved over to tech. I've been in tech for the last several years. And as I thought about it, I think the sort of the consistent thread through my career has been being attracted to really complex problems that companies or products or people have identified fairly elegant or sort of simple solutions for. Because I think it's oftentimes the most difficult to create a simple solution for something complicated. And, when I came across Snapdocs and the team and met Aaron, was not just impressed by him and the rest of the team at the company, and the position in the industry, but also just the solution that they had created. And so was thrilled to be able to come on board about 18 months ago or so now.
Oh, that's awesome. And you're not kidding. I think many of us in the industry can relate to trying to solve for some of the complexities within the closing process, and especially in the push to digitize it as much as possible. It's quite the matrix to jump into. So, some might say you're a glutton for punishment in that regard, but obviously, part of a company that's come a long way to really solve for some of those complexities. And we'll dive a little bit later into the conversation into that too, but appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with Snapdocs, being relatively new to the Mortgage Collaborative Network, and going to be excited to have you guys out for first TMC conference next month. Love to give you the opportunity to kind of provide our audience a little color on, how Snapdocs in the current environment supports the closing management needs of both IMBs and depositories alike.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll step back with sort of what Snapdocs is. I maybe just answer the basic question. As I mentioned a bit at the outset, Snapdocs is on the mission to enable the perfect close. And what that means to us is less work, completely error-free, completely transparent, as expedient as possible, and completely secure. And what the sort of hypothesis has been that Aaron has seen sort of over the last couple of decades and that we've experienced as a company is that it's not really a lack of technology that has kept us from sort of enabling digital closings at scale, because we've had e-signature technologies, e-vaults and e-notes, and even webcam notarization for well over a decade, in some cases over 2 decades. But what has prevented us from solving this problem has been the fragmentation in the industry, particularly when it comes to the close. You have over 15 parties involved that can have thousands of permutations depending on who they are, particularly in purchase transactions where you may not be able to choose your partners, that have all different tech stacks and preferences and live in different geographies that have different rules. And so our perspective has been to be the connective tissue that sort of brings that sort of foundational infrastructure amongst all of those parties, to enable parties to automate processes in how they interact with one another, as well as within their own systems. And the way that we've done that is by creating a platform that allows all of the major users to be tech agnostic, so they can stay in their own, as lenders, they can stay in their LOS, whichever LOS it may be, their doc prep, with title system, with settlement companies, work within their own title production system, and still work seamlessly with Snapdocs borrowers, working with any point of sale. And then of course, working with any loan type, any closing type, and then creating that experience that's optimized for all of those users. So I think at the end of the day, it's our focus has been on fulfilling the promise of digital closings, right? I mean, how do we reduce the complexity, increase the speed, reduce the headache ultimately that lenders face, particularly in a traditional closings process, but also as many have tried to convert to digital closings over the years. And our focus is on doing so in a scalable manner. And I think, the proof is in the pudding a bit. We've had 8 years of automating closing processes. We handle 250,000 closings a month, over 200 lenders on board at this point, and we're continuing to accelerate. So that's Snapdocs in a nutshell. But look forward to continuing to dig in a bit. I know you've got some more questions.
Oh, absolutely. Just a reminder for everybody, this is Tech Talk. Tom Galucci, joined by Snapdocs Vice President of Business Development, Todd Maki. And yeah, I mean, you're spot on, Todd. I mean, the technology I think has been in place for, a number of years, kind of depending on the different components, but there was always the challenges. What would be that silver bullet, or what would be the year in place that kind of turned the tide as far as adoption towards digital closings? And undoubtedly, COVID has been kind of the elephant in the room, impacting our lives in so many ways, and really the last 12 to 18 months. And clearly, the ability to get loans closed in a remote or unconventional setting, especially early on in the pandemic, kind of accelerated the digital closing adoption to the loan closing process, just because there's a hair on fire need, and suddenly everybody had to figure out a way to, get these loans to the closing table and, keep the lights on. So I'd love, your perspective on what you saw from a Snapdocs lens, and how Snapdocs and fintech in general really stepped up to the plate, under a really unfortunate set of circumstances to keep our industry producing and really thriving.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it was interesting, in 2020, lenders faced really two major issues that they had to address, right? One was, obviously the onslaught of the pandemic and COVID, and increased pressure to support no contact or low contact closings, as you mentioned. But then also that coupled with a huge increase in volume with record low rates, driving to, the biggest year, right, on record in terms of mortgages. And so pulling together those two issues, right, created a sort of a perfect storm a bit for different lenders. I think from Snapdocs perspective, we were a bit fortunate in timing, only because we had brought our closings product to market back in 2017, 2018 timeframe. And so in early 2020, we had a mature product that had several customers that were operating at a reasonable scale. And so we were fortunate to be able to support that, as you said, sort of the hair and fire moment, right? And we see an enormous tidal wave of demand saying, how are we going to do this? How are we going to solve it? And so having one, sort of the tech infrastructure to be able to support that was huge for us. But then two, recognizing it's not just a technology solution, right? As I talked about before, it's also change management and process management, and how do you support this new technology and stack, and this new way of interacting with your counterparts? And so we've, one thing that Snapdocs, I think, wisely did was invest extremely heavily in implementation and customer success. So our implementation team, our customer success team, is quite robust, particularly relative to what we've seen as other sort of players in the space. And so we really helped provide a white glove experience to lenders as they came on board, to walk them through that implementation, ensure that they understood the change management, help them with the business process management, and then sort of hang on with them as they scaled and rolled it out to different branches, or rolled out additional digital technologies as well. I think there's one Stratmore stat that I think is most interesting, which is, and I think it was end of 2020 or recently, which is 40% of lenders have a hybrid e-close technology implemented, but only 12% of those 40% have achieved 75% or more penetration. So the vast majority of companies that have tried rolling out hybrid technology are not at scale, right? They're not doing 75% of their business in hybrid. At Snapdocs, 80% of our lenders are doing 80% or more adoption. We see 80% more adoption on the platform. And so I think that sort of goes to speak for that sort of white glove, support that we provide, sort of to help lenders walk along that path to digitization.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, stats like that really jump out at you as far as, helping achieve kind of that overall adoption for, maybe what lender clients had on their roadmap. And I think two things from kind of your remarks that jump out to me is, one, I imagine having a RON offering as well through Snapdocs definitely had to help during the pandemic, as well, just as kind of state legislation was, being expedited to try to also help support from a, contactless closing perspective. But then on top of it, the client success component, I think, speaks volumes to your adoption rates too. I have firsthand experience working with so many companies out there in the third party space. I think a lot of lenders, have these high lofty expectations based off what they, experience a lot of times with the sales team. And then there, quite often could be a disconnect when that transition takes place to customer success. And the team that's really working on onboarding and implementing, a solution in place and creating that adoption. So there's that comfort level, with all different components within the lender client's operation. I mean, those are really the keys to, I'm sure creating kind of a client for life and seeing them really get the most out of, your offering, as opposed to, some where there's, like I said, a lot of disconnect in that transition towards adoption and implementation.
Yeah, we hear that a lot.
I'm sure. And as you mentioned too a little earlier, and you're spot on that the tech infrastructure has been in place for years now to support digital closings. It was certainly a boom during the pandemic because of this. It sounds like, and you kind of alluded to it, that technology isn't necessarily the issue these days as far as expanding your digital closing adoption. I'm curious for your perspective is what you see out there as potential impediments that still exist today that really present or prevent lenders from larger digital closing adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, we see the main issues which we focus on, right, which are the manual inefficiencies and manual processes that oftentimes don't go away with different types of digitization. And so we continue to focus on how do we mitigate those through automation, through connectivity, how do we remove those hurdles to adoption. But then I think broadly, there are, we see sort of two major themes that continue to be a priority for our clients and for the industry, which is one, understanding eligibility. There's a ton of variability in terms of closing acceptance for e-notes or remote online notarization in particular, whether it's counterparties, states, counties, title underwriters, et cetera. There's, as I mentioned, there's thousands of permutations that lenders have to understand and evaluate and be able to take into account. And so we've invested heavily in both creating an eligibility tool that helps automate the decision and understanding of how you can be, so to speak, within a given closing. But then also working with partners to help lenders understand their own eligibility, right? Creating an eligibility assessment, providing white papers and sort of industry content on what it means to be eligible, what it looks like to sort of walk along the digitization path, the different considerations to take into account, particularly for remote online notarization and for e-notes. And then two, I think another impediment, which is change management, is often underestimated, right? These are oftentimes substantial operational changes to implement digital closings. It's not just a buy the tech, flip a switch, turn it on, right? It's all about process optimization, process management, aligning efficiency. And so that again, goes to the point of why we've invested heavily in this white glove implementation and customer success management support, because we recognize that at the end of the day, it's an operational change. Closings are operational processes augmented by technology, and it's important to support lenders upon that transition.
Those are great points too, and we've seen it quite frequently in recent years where a lot of members within the collaborative network have an interest in starting down their path towards digitalization of their closing process, whether it's just starting out with a hybrid model or trying to make the jump to fully E. And while there's that invested interest out there, a lot of times until they really start to dive in, they're relatively unfamiliar with all the different counterparties and components and just the internal infrastructure that you really need to have in place, to your point, to be able to flip that switch on. That there's a lot more legwork and diligence to create the infrastructure necessary to support that. And sometimes it comes off very surprising once they start to head down that road. So I think it's such a awesome advantage that Snapdocs has an e-eligibility assessment platform too, which we're going to talk about in just a moment here. And I've actually dropped that in the chat as well for our attendees too, to be able to take a look at that and connect with Snapdocs on that front. Kind of pivoting on here, I'm also curious, Todd, your perspective around the complexities, whether they be perceived or real, around e-notes. You kind of talked about it briefly before, but would love your thoughts on how they may be impeding more digital closings from being conducted. And I'll let you kind of take it away.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately complexity increases the more digital a closing gets, right? And so one of the approaches we've taken to minimize that complexity as much as possible is to ensure that every closing a lender does with Snapdocs is the same process. So step one in implementation, we bring all of a lender's closings, wet traditional closings, onto the Snapdocs platform to ensure sort of a single standard operational process and remove a lot of the complexity that would otherwise exist as we begin to roll out additional technologies. That does two things. One, it sort of helps alleviate future complexity, and two, it provides immediate value, right? Because that way you're immediately seeing efficiency benefits. And then, as you sort of turn the dial, so to speak, as you get more digital, hybrid is oftentimes a fairly simple step. There are many less regulatory or partnership hurdles. The e-note is probably the most complex, right? Both in terms of the impact on counterparties and coordination that it relies on, as well as the fact that it requires incremental technology, right? You need to be able to generate the smart doc, to have an e-vault in place, to be able to integrate with the e-registry, all of which Snapdocs, of course, facilitates and supports our lenders on. But that incremental complexity just becomes sort of another turn of the dial right after you've aligned your closings on a single process. And so we're very focused on how do we support lenders in continuing to ensure they can be as as they can be and helping them along that path. And as you mentioned, and you put in the link, to help with this, particularly for lenders who are just stepping into understanding e-eligibility, how they can be. We partnered with Falcon Capital to conduct this eligibility assessment. And as you mentioned in the chat, it's completely free. So highly recommend every member of the Mortgage Collaborative sign up for this. No obligation, no nothing. It's literally, we see it as a major impediment to going digital. And it's a service we want to provide to the industry alongside Falcon Capital to conduct this assessment and help lenders get an overview of their specific scenario, right, based on their geographies, based on their partners and investor set, to help them create a roadmap to digitize their closings. And then I think I like stats. One stat that I appreciate is, as we look back to MERS e-note onboarding, so how many lenders were brought onto the MERS platform last year? More than 50% of lenders brought onto the platform last year, in the second half of last year, were Snapdocs customers. So it just sort of goes to show how we're incrementing, this incremental approach, helping all of our lenders transition to adopt e-notes is proving out to be quite effective, right? And those lenders, once onboarded with MERS, can then begin ramping their e-note delivery.
I mean, it's awesome. A couple things here. Just want to reiterate how impressed I am, and I think our team is too, just with the closing eligibility assessment that you offer in conjunction with Falcon Capital Advisors, complimentary, knowing that something along those lines typically costs 5 figures. And there's not an obligation to do business with Snapdocs as part of that assessment. I think that's such a huge boon to the lender out there who, to your point, maybe is just starting to peel back the onion on how, figuring out how they can be, to be able to go through that process and have, a trusted advisor essentially out there, based on their geography, where they're doing business in. I mean, it's such a huge leg up to get a real world assessment of, where they can get to now and, you know, really take back as far as their digital strategy. So highly encourage members listening in to reach out to Todd and the team and take advantage of that opportunity. Quick question I have for you too. In the early part of the comments, you mentioned, you know, um, trying to create that single process for all closings for your lender clients. Do they have kind of a direct hand in configuring that with Snapdocs is kind of part of the boarding process?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we're tech stack agnostic. Our objective is to fit into the systems in which you have and fit into the processes, and what we work with our lenders in that sort of that implementation process to identify how do we, what changes need to be made in process, how are we going to integrate, optimize those integrations into your existing platforms to ensure that we create that optimal process that then can be consistent across all of your closings. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a ton of configuration during the implementation process to ensure that it's optimized for each lender.
It's awesome. Yeah, nothing worse than getting signed up with a digital closing provider and then coming to find out as you go through the implementation process that one of your core providers isn't integrated or aligned with your provider, and then you're really stuck between a rock and a hard place. But quick reminder again, Tom Gallucci here. It's the latest edition of Tech Talk. I'm here with Vice President of Business Development with our newest preferred partner, Snapdocs, Todd Maki. Todd, next question for you. I'm curious from the Snapdocs perspective, have you seen any common trends amongst your client base that have conducted the most hybrid or e-closings?
Yeah, for sure. I think there are probably two common themes. I think one, most importantly, is that it's digital closings is recognized as being a strategic initiative, and that the lender is pursuing that initiative not to check a box to enable e-signings, or not to check a box to say that we can do a RON, for instance, but because they're seeking to extract real business value from the investment, right? The investment in the technology, investment in the process change, because lenders should expect to see significant reduction in post-process QC, reduced dwell times, increase in improved consumer experiences, and many more. And so tying success metrics to that, real business success metrics to the implementation, benchmarking them up front, tracking success over time, and tying that back to a strategic business initiative is critical, right? Because that's how you get the buy-in to go through the effort that we mentioned, the change management and so on, to ensure that you're actually extracting the value that you should be. And then second is sort of in support of that, lenders that default to digital after they've implemented the technology perform better on almost every single metric. Actually, not almost every single metric that they're tracking consistently outperform lenders that have an opt-in to digital approach. And so we see it as critical, particularly because there is change management, right? There is inertia within the business. It's critical to ensure that digital is default, so that the only way to not do default is to opt out as necessary, rather than opting in as convenient, right? And that creates dramatically better adoption, and again, performance across any metric that we've ever seen a lender track on it.
Yeah, I mean, being able to track that data and extrapolate that into ROI or enhanced efficiencies, I think really proves out the process. And to your point, I think especially in the last year, probably in part due to the pandemic, we've started to see that be a recruitment tool for lenders that were ahead of the game and have a fully digitized closing process in place. When trying to attract top talent on the originator side, nothing worse than having concerns about your ops team or your processes in place, that the volume that you're bringing in is going to get close in a timely fashion, so that you can produce return and referral business from that.
Yeah, that's right. And frankly, I mean, we've got lenders and a ton of success stories, but who are able to do 40, 50, 60% more volume without adding any headcount in their closing department. because after they've implemented Snapdocs. And so, as we talk about, the enormous, volume increase last year and sort of the hiring needs, there was a huge benefit that a lot of, our clients had seen, which was great to be able to be a part of and support them in.
Yeah, and a huge benefit going forward too, just as we continue to see more of the 2021 buzzword margin compression taking place to kind of help increase the overhead for lenders.
Yeah.
It's similar lines, I guess. You guys made big headlines in Q2 with a $150 million capital raise, and I'd love to allow you an opportunity to kind of share with our audience where Snapdocs is investing this additional capital in your operation.
Yeah, absolutely. Hugely beneficial to have that sort of in our war chest, so to speak, as we continue to accelerate and expand. Frankly, the vast majority of that investment is going back into the product, right? We see closings as a new category. It's so complex. There's so much opportunity. There's so much value that lenders can extract, that we see closings developing into another category alongside loan origination, alongside point of sale, alongside doc prep, to have closings as a separate and distinct category. And as I mentioned at the outset, this is our focus, right? Snapdocs is 100% dedicated to perfecting the close. And so all of that resource that's going into the product is going to go into enabling, increased automation, ensuring that we continue to accelerate our innovation so we can add new value up and down, upstream of the close and downstream of the close. And I guess to be specific, there's a few areas, and we talked a couple of them, a few areas that we see a substantial need for lenders, where we see a huge opportunity to invest and that we think we can bring a lot of value. One of them is helping lenders continuing to scale eNote adoption, right? Ultimately, there's a significant amount of value that lenders can extract through eNotes, but as I mentioned, it's one of the most complex parts of implementation. And so we have a lot of development that we're investing to help streamline that process, automate that process, reduce the complexity, and ultimately help lenders achieve that outcome. And then second is, more broadly, identifying and finding new ways to use the artificial intelligence that we have. Our core to our system, the heart of our system, is our artificial intelligence engine, and that's reviewing the docs, it's placing the tags, but also identifying how we can use that to continue to remove manual processes, expanding the use of our AI to support critical needs like document QC or other areas that are significant cost centers, significant value opportunities, right, for lenders. So that's to name a few, but at the end of the day, it's all about how do we continue to innovate in the product, continue to bring value to lenders.
No question too, and I think that's been a common theme for a couple of years now, is really from our membership, lenders looking at any way to eliminate manual or repetitive processes anywhere through their origination process all the way through closing, reduce turn times, the amount of staff that they need to support that. So I think that's a huge boon to your clients and hopefully to your future clients as well. So to close out Tech Talk today, I'd love to have you share with us just some of the current and upcoming innovations or releases, to the extent that you can, that Snapdocs is particularly excited about, just to whet the beak for our audience.
Yeah, it's interesting timing with this. We've got, a series of large announcements coming out in the next, 30 to 45 days. And so I'll hint at them, but stay tuned. I mentioned, we mentioned a few times e-eligibility. That has been and continues to be a major area of investment for us. We have some huge announcements coming up in the month of September on that. So certainly in that space. Second, as I mentioned, increasing automation and use cases for our AI. I mentioned a few specifics, but we've got some big product announcements coming up again in the next, I think, 4 to 6 weeks on that. And then of course, always, expanding our technology integrations, right, and increasing our connectivity, increasing the openness of our platform by bringing in additional partners that we have off the shelf integrations and support for. And so we've got a few notable ones there as well. So we'll let you know as soon as they're released and we can say a bit more, but stay tuned.
No, appreciate that, Todd. And then, really just for wrapping up today, first off, I want to encourage, our attendees and the collaborative members as a whole, to reach out to your member benefit advocate to get in touch with Snapdocs. You can do so directly with the Snapdocs team. So they can point you in the direction of the free eligibility assessment. And also to learn more about Snapdocs' platform. I also want to plug too, as I mentioned, this will be Snapdocs' first mortgage collaborative conference, and we're excited because you guys are going to have a great presence at the conference. And to our lender members, Snapdocs is hosting a Sunday luncheon at the conference, where maybe some more of these details around some of the exciting announcements you're rolling out over the coming weeks and months be able to be expanded upon. So stay tuned for some RSVPs to the members coming out for that. And then really, collaborative members are going to be able to learn more about Snapdocs' client successes during their Lightning Showcase presentation on Monday at the conference. And we're excited to have a live edition of the Rundown with Rob and Rich at our Tuesday lunch of the conference. It's going to feature Snapdocs Vice President of Sales and Revenue, Brian Michael, who's going to be co-hosting with Rob and Rich and repping Snapdocs for part of that discussion, which I'm sure will heavily lean around kind of digital closings and where our industry is heading as a whole. So stay tuned for that. And Todd, I want to thank you again for joining me today. I really enjoyed this discussion and you kind of taking us a little deeper under the hood of everything that Snapdocs has built out just in the last 8 years of existence.
Yeah, no, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. It's great to talk with you.
Always a pleasure. Well, to our listeners, be on the lookout for the podcast and YouTube links for on-demand viewing of today's Tech Talk discussion, and also be able to share it. Please share it with individuals within your organization who couldn't join us today, but would certainly gain value from this discussion. And then until we meet again on Tech Talk, hoping you stay well, and we'll see you soon.